Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hello everyone, it's Jesse Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It's really terrific to have your company for another episode of the show. Now, as practice owners, one of our key roles is to be able to build and lead teams. And if we want to have any success in business, that's a skill that we need to learn to master. And of course, it's not a skill that we're born with. It's not a skill that is taught at dental school. It's a skill that we need to develop after dental school. But it is a skill like any other skill that can be learned. And if we're going to be building teams, we need to understand that it is our team that looks after our business. Our team looks after our patients. And so we need to be able to look after our team. We need to be able to create an environment for them to thrive, and if not just thrive, but to do the best that they can, to do the best work that's possible. And part of the skills that we need to develop is that of empathy. And my guest today is Daniel Murray from empathicconsulting.com. And in this podcast, we're going to be talking about how empathy as a leadership tool unlocks discretionary effort, how it unlocks culture, how it unlocks the ability to produce way more than we've ever been able to produce before. And we're going to talk about what empathy is and what it's not. And I was thinking this was going to be a bit of a touchy-feely kind of episode, but it's not. This is really about practical leadership to deliver practical results. I'm going to really commend Daniel's work to you. If you head across to his website, empathicconsulting.com, there's a heap of resources there that I encourage you to read and download. But as we get through this episode, as always, have a pen and paper handy, because what Daniel shares are absolute pearls of wisdom, nuggets of gold that are going to help you achieve the best things in your practice and really move the dial in your business and in your life. So without any further ado, here's Daniel Murray. Daniel, thank you so much for making the time to come and join us here at Savvy Dentist Podcast, all the way from Bribie Island, a piece of paradise right where you are, my friend. How's things in your world?
Look, it's actually it's great. It's rainy up here at the moment, but I can't complain. It's a lovely place to live up here, I have to say.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, mate, you're well known in the business and leadership circles around empathic leadership. But I was really curious to note your background is in mathematics, behavioral economics, doing an MBA, strategy. That sounds like a bit of a ziggy-zaggy kind of journey. Maybe it's not, but how does a mathematician find their way into empathy?
It might be an interesting path. It was a pretty simple moment, actually, early in my career. We used to run large strategy programs of work and projects, and I was working with this gentleman, we'll call him John, and John had this beautiful Gantt chart. He had all of these, this beautiful spreadsheet, colors and chevrons and all this great stuff for this project we were about to kick off. And it was a big piece of work, 6 months, hundreds of millions of dollars. Anyway, he had a resource map there, and there was a term at the top of one of the columns that said FTE, which means full-time equivalent. And so I had all these names down the side and all these numbers, ones and 0.5s, etc., in this resource map. And I said to him, hey, John, what if they don't want to do the work? He said, well, what? I said, well, you've got all these people. Like, let's just pick this guy here, Bob. I know Bob. I've worked with Bob. You've got him as a 1. Now, I can tell you from working with him, sometimes Bob's a 1. Sometimes he's a 0.2. Other days he's like a 1.3, right?
Yeah.
From a purely mathematical perspective, that seems like a really huge amount of variability when you're taking this person and multiplying them across 6 months of work. How do you manage and monitor that level of variability? I mean, it's not woo-woo, right? That's just maths.
Yeah.
And he said, we just ignore it because it doesn't fit in the spreadsheet. And my thought was, how can you just ignore something so significant? In any other workplace, if you said to someone, let's just ignore heat, let's just ignore, radiation, it's nonsense to even think of doing it. But in work, we tend to misinterpret people being there and people being productive. And those two things can be vastly different. And we as leaders and as people have huge influence over whether someone turns up as a 0.2 or as a 1.3. Or whatever else can happen for them. And so my fascination became purely from a operational and strategic perspective. How can we get better at understanding and monitoring and influencing that way that people care about their work and they want to deliver their work, because that's going to impact productivity, which then flows straight through to the bottom line pretty significantly.
Empathy can sound like, empathic leadership can sound very touchy-feely. It can sound borderline woke. What I'm hearing from this conversation is, how do we make Bob a 1.3? How do we get that discretionary effort? How do we boost productivity? So there's real commercial outcomes at stake here. And so for anyone listening, if you think this is going to be one of those touchy-feely, let's hold hands and sing a nice song, I think you're going to be in for a different journey. So let's unpack that, because I wanted to talk a little bit about discretionary effort for a moment, because you just spoke about Bob being a 0.2 or maybe a 1.3, and the 1.3 to me really represents, or the 0.3 above the 1 represents that discretionary effort. How do we quantify discretionary effort? How do we extract discretionary effort, and how do we make people happy to give it?
And this is where it gets difficult sometimes. As an analytical person, I love to be able to measure things, and it's great to be able to say, how many, how much, and can I monitor it effectively. But if I was to ask you, what's your level of personal care, productivity, passion for the work you're doing at any point in time, that it'll fluctuate based on thousands and thousands of different factors that are internal and external. And things as simple as, am I tired? Am I hungry? Impact us. And so the question then is, well, why does it impact us? And part of it's, we have to understand a bit about the human brain. So a lot of that discretionary effort comes from our subconscious drivers. It doesn't come from logic. It doesn't come from reason. It doesn't, very few people think their way to being more passionate about something, right? Even when you say it, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to have to monitor and measure it, you can't be just focused on these tangible things. The most common thing I hear people do is go, cool, I'll give someone a bonus. I'll give them more money. Now, what's really interesting is your subconscious brain doesn't care much about money.
No.
Unless it's not fair. Unless it perceives it's not what it deserves, then it cares a lot. And so we get this sort of, if we're not paying people what they think they deserve, you have a huge impact. But as soon as you hit the fair line, then actually anything else doesn't really add a lot. So what the question is, well, what does that subconscious brain care about? And it cares about things like, am I doing something that's making a difference and worthwhile? Do I have some agency? Do I feel like I'm in control, or I have some sort of choice in the matter? And if we just think about those two things, when you're running a practice and you've got, you might be the person doing all of the technical work, those things are really obvious for you and really clear. Whether you're helping a patient to have a better smile, or overcome something pretty significant that's going on in their life, and that meaning is really important for you. But when they go outside and talk to the receptionist, or they deal with someone else in your clinic, does that person also feel they're playing a real part in that same piece of work, or do they feel like they're just doing some menial task on the side? Are they doing things because they're important, or are they doing things because you told them to do them? And again, this is where things like that sense of agency, if I'm just doing it because you said so, then why should I care about doing it? Why should I really feel passionate about doing it? And this is some of the, that might sound obvious, but then the signals we send to people when we're working with them, and the way we talk about their work, and I'll just hurry up and do this, in our moments of frustration and all those other things that go on, actually have a really big impact on the subconscious drivers within those people who we're working with. And it's not, I don't want to get too sort of woo-woo, but that's just the basic neuroscience behind what drives our actions.
It's really interesting. I've been thinking a lot about Maslow's hierarchy lately, and how we all have our physiological needs, our safety needs, our needs for love and connection, our esteem needs, and obviously self-actualization, if you go through his levels there, and how the workplace can meet some of those needs, because you're quite right. I think a paycheck might meet the physiological and safety needs, roof over your head, food on the table kind of stuff. It's such an incomplete picture, and I think people throw the pay lever because they don't know what else to do. And equally, team members might not be able to articulate what's missing for them. So maybe they think that if you just gave me a bit more money, I could put up with this misery a bit more. But it actually doesn't address the issue. The real issue is getting those other needs met. And so I wondered where empathy and empathic leadership fits perhaps into Maslow's hierarchy. Is it around that connection piece? Is it around the esteem and agency piece? Is it? I know I'm kind of overlaying a framework to this that may or may not be appropriate, but I'm just trying to square that in my head.
Yeah, let's go back a step even further. What does safety mean to you? What does that feeling that I've got those bases covered mean to you? And do you just use that to assess whether you're providing that to your people? Because, when I think about the leaders I work with often, they'll sort of go, but my people are fine. They've got everything they need. Okay, that might seem true from your perspective, but you don't matter in this equation for them. What matters is how they feel about the situation. And so one of the things that I talk about with empathy that might sort of relate here, people often say empathy is walking in someone else's shoes. And I want to break that, because it's not. Empathy is understanding their experience in their shoes. Now, if you walk in their shoes, you might go, cool, well, that much money and these sorts of working conditions. Look, you only have to come in at this time and leave at that time. What's the big deal? It's easy. But how you feel about it is irrelevant. What really matters is how they feel about it. And so empathy is trying to understand what's going on for them, what's going on in their world, what's driving, what's making them feel a bit frazzled or unsafe. And look, when you look at you comment around asking them is a really interesting one. Google, as they're growing, they're doing lots of experiments with HR and people practices. They asked their people what they wanted, and their people said more money. But Google didn't. The HR team at Google didn't believe them, and so they did a split test. They gave one cohort the money they asked for. The other one, they gave them different types of recognition, experiences, days off, things that were far more meaningful and things that they probably wouldn't have spent the money on straight away themselves, but that they really liked. And what they found was the second group, the experiences group, was both far happier and far more productive. And so sometimes when you ask people, if you're feeling a bit overworked and stressed and unappreciated, then when I ask you, hey, what do you want? I'm actually asking your conscious brain, and your conscious brain goes, well, money's good, so let's go with that. But it's not the thing driving that productivity. It's not the part of the brain driving discretionary effort, right? And so you've got, as a leader, my question would be, if you don't know if your people are feeling safe or not, that's the problem. The fact that you don't know what's going on with them. If you don't know what drives them. And so like a really simple tip, let's say you've got a person who works in reception. If you don't know if they're married or not, if they've got kids or not, their kids' names, when their kids' birthdays are, what their relationship is with their family, then you're missing huge amounts of opportunity. Because I could give you an extra $500. Or I could say, hey, look, I know next Friday, little Jenny's netball finals on, and I want you to take the afternoon off and make sure you've got time to go, spend the time with her and really enjoy the experience. Which do you think is going to create a better, which one are they going to talk about, when they're at a barbecue with their friends? Which one are they going to give that? It's obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
But we have to put the work in to understand.
We do. And I wanted to ask you, because you've done such a nice, eloquent job of beginning the conversation about what empathy is and what it's not. I wondered, while we're talking about that as well, can we differentiate empathy from, say, compassion or sympathy, just while we're kind of getting our definition straight?
This is certainly something you can dive into a clinical, black hole into the different types of empathy. Yeah, that's right. I try and keep it fairly simple. Sympathy is how you feel about someone else's situation, right? So I feel sorry for them. I still feel sad for them. But your focus is on you. It's how they make you feel. right? Which is not really useful from a leadership perspective. Empathy is how they feel, what's going on for them, and me trying to understand what that is. It doesn't mean I have to feel how they feel. It doesn't mean I have to agree with them, but I want to understand what's driving them. And I think compassion is then saying, I'm going to take some action to help support or do something to make this person's situation better. You know, sometimes we take those actions without understanding. We see this sometimes, we think we're helping and actually we're not, because we haven't taken the time to actually understand what the situation is. Many years ago, this is a bit of a tangent, many years ago I was in India, and we were going to do a tour of Dharavi, which is a larger slum in Mumbai. And I went to a shopping centre and bought a whole bunch of coloured pencils. And my intention was, if kids came and asked us for money to beg, I'd give them pencils instead of money, because, you know, that'd be a nice thing for them to take away and colour. And I thought I was doing a good thing. When our host picked us up to take us on this tour, I told him that this is what I'd done, and I was feeling very smug and, you know, good about myself. And he said, don't give any pencils out. No one in the slum, no one will ask you for anything. No one will beg. Slum people don't beg. They're very proud people. They just don't have much money. Street people beg. Slum people do not. And if kids start going home saying they got pencils from a Westerner, the kids will get in trouble because the parents will think they were begging. Don't give out any pencils.
Wow. And
so immediately my feeling good about myself turned into, you know, what an a-hole. But, you know, this is the challenge with understanding people. It's very easy for us to make assumptions, do things that we think are good, and actually completely miss the mark. And so empathy is taking that time before I go and take some action to really try and understand what's going on, what drives this person, what do they care about, and how can I gain as much insight into that so I can make better decisions.
I live in Canberra.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'm moving back to Brizzy soon, okay? So it's okay. But the thing about living in Canberra is you become probably more interested in politics than you probably ought to, or than is good for you. And I'm interested in American politics and all those sorts of things as well. Based on my observation of leaders of all political persuasions, I'm not trying to single out one side or the other, empathy doesn't seem to be in abundance in some quarters of our society. And if we're talking about understanding, so one of the things that I get frustrated by, I have a relative I won't mention. She and I are oil and water, and she is of the cancel culture variety. You know, that person should be shut down, never to be heard from again, blah, 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 blah. And we got into a royal ding-dong with me saying, I just don't think that you win arguments or persuade people by shutting down conversations. And I'm not trying to get political here. I'm not trying to make a comment about that. But my point is that when we start labeling people, dismissing people, calling them some kind of ist or phobe or whatever, it feels to me like with all the right intentions that it's actually a really perversely wrong outcome. And I don't know if I'm kind of speaking nonsense or if that makes sense, what I'm trying to say.
Look, it does. The thing, when I work with lots of different leaders in lots of different industries, one of the things that I'll often say is when you're a leader, you've got to ask yourself the question, do I want to be right or do I want to get the right outcome?
Yeah.
And humans have this seemingly inbuilt desire to be right and to be justified. And what our brain's doing there is saying, I have a map or a model of the world and I want to make sure that that's stable and certain, and therefore I'll feel good about how I navigate through the world because I've got this level of certainty. Okay, good for me. The challenge is we'll do that at the expense of moving us all forward. And this is, you know, things like cancel culture, things like political debate, that tends to be what happens, unfortunately, is we want to be right rather than, hey, is this actually going to get us moving forward? And you'll see this all the time. People will attack each other's perspective.
Yes.
The thing that we need much more of, I think, is the ability to be curious, be consciously curious. And to hear someone's point of view and go, my immediate thought is don't agree, but it's interesting. Tell me more about it. And look, there's tools. I work with teams using certain tools that we've built around perspective taking and how do you see someone else's perspective. And I'll give you an extreme example just because it's maybe more useful. We put all sorts of funny things. Why would someone believe the Earth's flat? Why would someone, complain about certain things? Why would people hoard toilet paper? We have a bit of fun with it. But an extreme example might be, why would someone be a suicide bomber? Now, I don't agree. I would never condone. I think it's a terrible thing to do. But if that's all my perspective is around this, this is bad people doing bad things, it's not a very useful perspective.
Doesn't change anything.
No. And so if I wanted to actually influence change, I need to understand what else might be driving someone to do this. Right? Is it a cultural thing? Is it certain people? Are there structural, imagine waking up every day and hearing drones above you, and every now and then something blows up. And that's your reality for, 20 years or something. Still don't think it's the right thing to do or I'd condone it in any way. But if I can't understand that perspective more, what influence can I have other than telling someone they're wrong? And so your family member, I think they might have been in this sort of trap, which everyone, I think, falls into from time to time. I have a perspective and I want to tell you you're wrong and that I'm right. But as soon as I do that, my ability to really have any influence over you is almost gone.
I agree. And I see that in a lot of discourse, as I said. Living in Canberra, you see people, kind of almost shouting across the fence at one another from their different viewpoints. And I guess what I really want to try and talk about today in terms of being an effective leader and being able to influence people and affect change. You've spoken about curiosity and remaining judgment-free. As you say, it doesn't mean I have to agree, but just trying to understand what other tools increase levels of understanding, because you spoke about at the heart of empathy is the ability to try and understand someone's perspective. So what other tools do we have in our toolbox? We've got curiosity. What else is in that toolbox to be able to understand someone's perspective a little better?
Yeah, look, a really simple thing, and this is going to be horrendously obvious, is to ask really open and curious questions, which is not what we usually do. If you've got someone in the chair as a dentist and you're seeing something in their mouth that you're like, I wonder what's going on here. Often we'll ask specific questions to try and validate a hypothesis we've already got. And look, from a scientific perspective, that's a natural thing to do. Set a hypothesis and then ask questions to try and validate hypothesis. Unfortunately, if our hypothesis is completely wrong, then what we get very good at doing as humans is trying to find any evidence possible to validate and ignore any other possibilities. And so asking more open questions, maybe you've got a staff member who's doing something and you've asked them not to do that and they keep on doing it. Right. And so natural instinct is they're doing it because they're, silly, misguided. Maybe they're doing it on purpose. Right. Well, I form an assumption and then I go and look for the reasons. Instead of doing that, maybe it's just going, that's interesting. Why would they do that? Are there any, maybe asking them, hey, look, I noticed you're doing this thing. Just curious, talk me through how you do that. Talk me through why you're doing that. Now, again, how you ask the question is almost more important than the words that come out of your mouth.
Yeah, the tone and all those sorts of things, right?
Why are you doing that? Tell me. I want to know why. It's very different to, hey, look, I noticed you're doing this thing. How do you do that? Walk me through it. Let me just spend some time with you. And you might find that the reason they're doing it is because it's better than the way you thought. Maybe they've got some great ideas. Maybe they've misunderstood something. Maybe other experiences have happened. But that parking of my assumptions is a really easy thing to say, but a hard thing to do.
Oh, and that is so true. The world that I live in the coaching world, is based on curiosity and trying to ask questions and be curious and delve a little deeper all the time. But sometimes it is hard, and you resist. You have to resist the urge to either give advice or, as you say, to justify the hypothesis that's going in your mind. And I wanted to ask you about how to hold back from that, because it is a natural tendency. I've certainly fallen prey to that many times in my life. I've created hypotheses in my mind, and only to find out that the hypothesis was invalid from the outset. So how do we not fall into that trap?
It's a tough question because the answer's a pretty bad one in some ways. It's practice. I mean, how did you? Were you really good at filling cavities the first time? Of course not. No one was. No, very few people were even good at walking when they're very young, right? But you practice, and the thing that it takes is concentration. You have to actually mentally override. It takes some self-awareness. And so what I would say is, rather than saying that, how do we jump straight into it, I would recommend people to step back and go, okay, let's get more self-awareness. What the hell does that mean? Does it sound woo-woo a little bit? When you have a reaction to something, actually try and concentrate on, how am I feeling at the moment? Well, let's say someone does something in the office or writes an email and we don't agree with it, and we have a frustration feeling straight away. Rather than acting on that frustration and letting the frustration take the wheel and drive, actually saying, I'm feeling frustrated. How frustrated am I? Put this on a scale. Start to think, is this higher or lower than something else has happened? What's driving it for me? And what happens is this conscious curiosity starts to kick in about how I'm responding to this. And then the question is, how should I choose to respond rather than just react? Can I get some control over that? Again, it can sound a little bit woo-woo, but if someone cuts you off, I mean, this is a really obvious one that I see all the time. Someone cuts you off in traffic, ask yourself the question, wonder what's going on in their world today. Yeah. Because, when we cut people off in traffic, it's often not because we thought, I'm going to get this person, that'll teach them, right? No. It's something's going on. I didn't see, my mind's busy, I'm stressed, running late, kids are sick, whatever. So asking yourself these sorts of questions about what else could be going on and getting that as a habit that you do more often during the day allows you to deploy it when it's really needed.
Yeah, this is, we're bringing some of the concepts of mindfulness in here as well, being able to notice our feelings rather than just react unconsciously. And I really appreciate the difference between responding and reacting. I think that's really key, and putting that little bit of distance between the stimulus and the response, again, allows you to hopefully respond more consciously. From a leadership point of view and in business, we spoke a little earlier about the analytical types, who are, probably, if we look at them on the disc profile, on the CD kind of things, do some people find the ability to be curious easier than others? Do some people, have they got a natural disposition to this, or is this just purely and simply a learned skill, is what I'm asking?
I think both. Like most things, are some kids, better at maths naturally? Yes. Do they still have to practice lots? Of course. So, wherever you are on the scale, the thing I would say is if you keep practicing, you'll get better. And what I find, and this is probably one of the major things to remember, we sort of talked about that subconscious brain of the other person and trying to understand, are they feeling safe or not? You've got to also look after your own. Yeah. You've got to think, well, what mood am I in? And when you're looking through, often when I see someone do something, I have to think that I'm actually, the meaning of that person's actions or words doesn't come innately from them. What happens is data is flooding into my body, my eyes, ears, whatever, from that other person, and then I am interpreting that data. And the way my brain interprets data is it uses heuristics and mental models, so shortcuts. So, okay, someone's frowning. Okay, that's not good. Someone's smiling. That's good, right? So these little tiny frameworks that your brain's using. They use this word or that word, okay, and you make meaning from it. So the one question is the meaning I'm making actually accurate? Because some of the staff and patients that you'd have will see the world similarly to you. They'll respond to certain stimulus similarly to you. and some will be vastly different for cultural and all sorts of other reasons, right? So is my model appropriate? And if I can build lots of different models for different types of people, it gives me more flexibility to better interpret, right? The second thing is, what's my mood like? Because my mood will fundamentally change the way I interpret that data, right? If I'm stressed, pissed off, upset, like, it changes the whole way that my brain interprets all that data. Now, both of those things sit inside your head. They do not sit outside. So don't go blaming the outside world when you're interpreting this bad outcome. First go, hang on, am I interpreting this correctly? And is my mood having an influence? And am I happy with those two things? If so, and I want to shout and yell, go crazy, right? Feel free. Anger is not a bad thing, very useful sometimes, but deploy it intentionally. Don't let it drive in an inappropriate situation.
Interestingly enough, I wanted to share something that I do, and it may or may not be useful. I have an entirely remote workforce, which is different to the people listening to this podcast. They'll be in their practice. So perhaps there's some things that I can do that don't translate necessarily. But I can tell that if I'm in a bad mood, I know myself. I'm gonna chew someone's head off, and so I have to just disconnect and shut the doors, turn the phone off, do whatever, because I know that it's a little bit of risk mitigation if just lock yourself away because you know you're probably not going to be at your best. And I wanted to talk about how you might do that in an environment, how to create that little bit of a safety zone, a little bit of a demarcation zone, don't cross the line, so that if you are feeling pissed off and angry and whatever else, you can just kind of say to the people around you, I'm in a mood, today's not the day, whatever reason. How do you have that conversation well with your team just so that they know that, okay, Jesse's in a mood, today's not the day to ask him about something that might trigger a response that's unwelcome? Yeah,
look, it's sometimes the obvious answer is the easiest and the most appropriate, right? If you've got a strong, trusted relationship with your people, then you can actually just say that. Yeah. You can say, hey guys, look, I'm feeling the pressure today. And so just know that I'm going to be, I might be a bit prickly and I'm going to apologize in advance. Often what I've found though is when you say that, it reduces your mood, right? Because you become more aware of it. You're like, okay. And it reduces that uncertainty. The thing that humans hate the most is uncertainty. People often say humans hate change. It's not really true. We love some change. We dream about some change. We invest in some change. What we don't like is uncertainty, is not knowing. And I think the worst thing that you can be around your team as a leader is this Jekyll and Hyde type personality where they never know what they're going to get. Yeah. Right? If they aren't sure whether you're going to be, upset or happy. And if you're one of those people who, when things are good, you're their best mate, you're smiling, you're friendly. When things are tough, you're about to bite their head off. That creates a whole lot of uncertainty for our people. They can't trust what's going to happen next. Trust is a vital piece of this puzzle, right? And so again, they'll hold back, they'll not say things, they'll not ask questions they maybe should, and it'll cause more damage. So one thing I would really recommend is when you are in a good mood, when things are great, when things are calm, invest some time in building the trust amongst your team.
The emotional bank account.
Well, and look, also separate trust from rapport. Your job is not to be best mates with everybody. It's not to be best friends. Like trust and rapport aren't the same thing. I use this example. It's funny on this podcast. I often say to people, I don't have to like my dentist when I sit in the chair, but gee, I've got to trust her. When she gets the drill out, I've got to trust her. And there's people I like, but I wouldn't trust my daughter to stay overnight with them, right? I like them. They're a friend.
Yeah. No, I have 2 teenage daughters. I know that feeling well.
So in your team, do people trust you? Do people rely on you? Are you, as a leader, you can care about whether you trust them, but more importantly, do they trust you? Will they come to you with problems? You've got teenage daughters. Will they come to you and say, hey, I did this and I stuffed up? Now, they have to really trust that your response is going to be about caring for them, supporting them and helping them. And if we can build that relationship with our team members where when they stuff up, they come to us. When they've got an idea, they come to us and chat. When things aren't going well, their first response is, hey, I just want to have a chat about this. that's a huge strategic advantage.
Yeah, so far we've spoken about the leaders, which is often the practice owners, and of course there's other leaders in the team as well. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was managing team conflict, potentially. And sometimes as the leader in a business or the leader in any sphere, I suppose, you're sometimes drawn into conflict that other team members might be experiencing. And I wanted to get your take on how empathic leadership could be useful in that kind of scenario as well.
When there's conflict, too often we think that's a bad thing and we need to avoid conflict. And I want to call this out because it's something that happens too much these days, is because we feel like it's uncomfortable to disagree with people, we stop disagreeing, we hold our own comments, and that creates this avoidant type culture that we get at the moment is really challenging and devastating in terms of performance. So if you're having conflict, my first thing is good, because that means people care enough to speak up, right? And now what is the disagreement? Well, it's often just a difference of opinion or a different set of priorities. And so the first thing should be, well, let's unpack it. Let's talk it out. What are all the pros and cons? What are all the different things? The world's complex, right? There's lots of different ways you can solve something. One person says, I think we should do it this way. Another person says, no, I think we should do it that way. Okay. Well, what are the pros and cons? What are the implications? What too often happens is, as the leader, these two people come to you and look for you to have a decision, a bias, a choice. So the other thing I would really recommend is more a focus on, let's talk about the ideas and actually put them on a piece of paper, because the ideas are not the people. And when you get into a position where you're agreeing with a person over another person, then you'll get these emotional, relationship conflicts that end up becoming, horrible, hierarchical and, not very useful. So actually writing them down can be a way of saying, let's take those ideas out of these people and put them on a piece of paper. Now, they can be right, wrong, stupid, whatever. It doesn't matter. The people are fine. I still love the people, right? But the ideas are the things we want to interrogate.
I'm all on board with that. And, the whole disagree and commit thing, the whole Lencioni 5 dysfunctions of a team, interpersonal conflict. So we're not talking about my idea versus their idea. I'm talking about I'm not getting along with this person on a personal level, and it's now impacting my ability to do my work. It's impacting my enjoyment at work, and probably for both sides of that disagreement. And we, as the practice owner, or perhaps even the practice manager, are kind of stuck in the middle trying to resolve and untangle that. The
thing that often I would say is what's driving the conflict, because when people say, oh, it's a personality clash,
it's usually lack of trust in the situations I've seen.
Agree. I think that's exactly right. It's often actually we're doing things in ways that are conflicting with each other's sense of what's right and wrong and values. So one of the things that is overlooked, I think, and done way too quickly, and I wrote a whole book on this, is we think, okay, we've got to have values in our practice. All right, what are 5 words we like? Oh, integrity, professionalism, excellence, right? We put those 5 words somewhere and never talk about them very much. Actually, if we said, what do we mean by those things?
What are the
how
behaviors?
Do we treat each other? Yeah, what are the behaviors that flow out of those? And how do we make some commitments to each other around those behaviors? And then if we miss on those commitments, we need to be getting feedback on the fact that we're not hitting the mark. And usually what I find in those conflicts is it's someone has a different set of values they're using to assess another person's behavior. And because there isn't really strong clarity, you can sort of look at it and go, well, I guess both of them are sort of right. And my perspective would be, as a leader, then you've not set really the expectations clearly enough around how we should be working together and how we should be doing things. The other thing to note is, what drives a lot of that conflict is someone feeling like another person isn't fully committed in the way that they think they should be, right? This other person isn't really doing it the way that they should be doing. They're not living up to it the way, that's not the standards that we have around here.
Yeah.
And that can be a consequence of us not setting those standards clearly enough, right?
Them, yeah.
Because I've seen plenty of people who go, actually, these people are doing fine. This person's standards are just, their expectations are much higher. And it's not fair to hold these other people to standards that are overly over the top, and vice versa, right? We've actually set the standards here. This person's behaving down here. We need to have a conversation. But if you can't have the conversation because the standards aren't clear, that's on you as a leader. You've got to set those expectations really clearly.
Yeah, cool. No, that's really useful. I guess what I wanted to talk about is leaning into empathic leadership. For some people, this will be a relatively new concept. In times gone by, it's like, why can't you just do the job? Why can't you just get on with it? Why can't you, I write the paycheck. Can you please just do the work and in the nicest way, be quiet and get on with it, right? So, that's perhaps old school. Well, not perhaps, it is old school, autocratic, probably from the last century or even earlier. And today's world, that's just not going to cut the mustard. So how does one start this process of becoming a more empathic leader? Is it just beginning with curiosity? Is it simply asking questions and seeking to understand?
Yeah, it is. But it's also building that curiosity in them, building that understanding in them, asking them questions that get them curious as well. Instead of saying, hey, do this way. It might be saying, hey, look, I've got some ideas on how we might do this. What do you think? How do you think we should handle this? And let them have that conversation and be open to changing and learning and adapting, because, we feel pride in our work. That there's a great little social experiment or psychological experiment done by a behavioral economist where he asked participants to build some small Lego pieces, right? And he was paying them $2 to start with, and it was a reducing amount each time. So 30 cents less each time, trying to see how many they would make for this small amount of money. And they pretty much exhausted all the money. They just made them all until they weren't getting paid anymore. In the second experiment, it was absolutely identical. The only thing was, if you built the first one, you would finish building it, you'd give me that Lego back, and then when I gave you the second Lego to build, I dismantled the first one you built. And so if you asked for another, I just gave you the same one again.
Wow.
And what people stopped much, much earlier, because part of it is, well, what's the point of me building this thing? You're only going to take it apart and make me build it again.
Yeah.
Now imagine if instead we had a lineup of little kids who, after I built them, I got to give it to them as a present. How many would I build then?
Heaps.
The money wouldn't matter, would it? I'd go, how many kids are there? I guess that's how many we're doing. And so same task, but the way in which we position it, the way in which we think about it completely changes the way our people feel about the task. And if we say, oh, look, you just have to get the accounts done, just do them, like they're a pain, but just do them. Of course, you just told them it's a waste of time and not very good and that they shouldn't feel proud about it. But, if you say, hey, look, this is critical because without this whole house of cards doesn't work, right? Nothing will function effectively. You have a massive impact. Well, that's also going to change the way they think about it.
What's the upside of empathic leadership? And, if people get this right, what will they notice? What will they experience? Obviously, we've spoken about discretionary effort already, but what does that mean in terms of productivity, morale, culture, team retention? Like, what are the benefits of all of this?
Yeah, look, the benefits are you actually start to see things that you often miss.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever found that when you go through your own, like I'm sure you do this in Canberra, if someone visits and you take them around to have a look at some things, they'll point things out and you'll go, I never saw that before. I never noticed that, right? All right, yeah, that is pretty cool. I find now when I travel all the time, I'll try and do that. I'll look around and go, wow, check out that tree. That's amazing. That must be so old. That when you have more curiosity, you start seeing things that are right there that you miss. And often that includes lots of opportunities to make your business better, to reduce wastage and time. You start looking for certain things. And again, if you can embed that in your people, imagine if every one of your staff was always thinking, gee, how can we make this a little bit better? How can we make this faster? How can we actually reduce a bit of cost out of some of the wasted cost out of this? That constant curiosity and sort of trying to understand what's going on has such a massive shift to the way people think about their work and the outcomes they can get. So there is huge upside. But look, there is also a warning. Empathy is hard. It's It takes work. It takes mental energy. It takes time. And, I often say to people, deploy it sparingly. Don't try and be curious and empathetic all the time. Don't question everything. When you're driving home and there's a red light, stop. Don't think, well, maybe it's not, right? But when you're dealing with your staff, why wouldn't you invest that extra effort to really try and build that relationship so you've got that trust and understanding?
Ladies and gents, I would really commend Daniel's work to you. And if you want to head across to his website, which is empathicconsulting.com, there's a whole variety of stuff there. There's a whole section around books and resources, and you can have a look at the books there. There's business books, there's even kids books, there's free ebooks and resources, and equally there's a whole section there around high performance teams and practical empathy workshops and so on. So if this has resonated with you, and I hope it has, because I think it's actually really important. I think if you're going to create a business that thrives into the future and gives you all the things that you want from it, not just in a monetary sense, but in a satisfaction and fulfillment sense, then I think this form of leadership is going to need to be at the heart of all that you do. Then I'd invite you to explore Daniel's website, empathicconsulting.com. Take yourself across those resources and perhaps, read a book, get an ebook, download, engage Daniel's services, and take it from there, because I think this is going to be really important for you. Daniel, you're a good man, and I appreciate all that you've shared today. Any final thoughts, final words that you want to leave the audience with?
Only just caring about your people is sort of it seems like it's an obvious thing, but not enough people do it. And actually caring about them. People often said, what if I don't care about my people? And my honest answer is, well, you shouldn't lead them. Leadership is a people role, and you have to care about those people. And if you want them to care about the customers, you want them to care about you, then you have to lead that dance. So I think there's a lot of opportunity if we can just take a slightly different perspective to the way we lead.
It reminds me of a couple of quotes that leadership is a contact sport is one that I heard. And what's the old one? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Daniel, thanks once again, mate. Thanks for taking the time to join us from your little piece of paradise up there at Bribey. And ladies and gents, please do head across to empathicconsulting.com, grab a resource there, and really start exploring that journey, what it could look like for you in your practice. The upside is enormous, and it's worth the effort. Thanks again, mate.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast. For more episodes, go to drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist. And to discover how to build a high-performance dental practice, visit drjessiegreen.com and download the free report.